This is a 1968 Bizzarini. It's one of the most rare cars in the world. They only made 114 of these cars. It is an Italian car with an American motor, which was really an unusual thing to do back in 1968. I am the only person in the United States racing a Bizzarini. There are 2 or 3 Bizzarinis that are raced in Europe and the UK. This is my favorite car to drive on a racetrack. I'm always the only Bizzarini out there, and I get to race against Camaros and Ford Mustangs and Chevrolet Corvettes and other cars from the mid-1960s. The picture that is in this magazine is the Bizzarini and me coming down the corkscrew at a racetrack in California called Laguna Seca. And Laguna Seca is arguably one of the most famous racetracks in the world, certainly one of the most famous racetracks in the United States. And the corkscrew is a 40 to 50 foot drop from the top of the hill to the bottom of the hill with a left turn, a right turn, and then a left turn to drop from 40 to 60 feet from the top of the hill to the very bottom. As you might imagine, you come up to the top of the hill going 75, 85, 95 miles an hour, slam on your brakes, turn left, turn right, and turn left again, and it is so much fun. This is a 1953 Pegasso. It is a Spanish-made car, meaning built in Spain in 1953. Pegasus is the flying horse from mythology, and that's what this car is named after, the flying horse. So this car was so far ahead of its time back in the day, and it was the fastest production car in the world, and it cost almost $20,000 to make 70 years ago, which would be the equivalent of $2 or $3 million today. So it was a very, very special car. This particular car was the first one made of the Salchek body cars, and it was at the Paris car show and the Barcelona show car as a good representation of what you could buy from Picasso. The man that ended up buying this car didn't get the car for almost 2 years because Picasso was taking it to shows all over the world to show it to people, and even though the man that first bought it owned the car after the Paris show car show, it took him a couple of years before he actually got the car. This car has run in several rallies back in the day. It has been in several car shows. You can see the trophy on the roof. It won Best of Class in Houston at a car show a few years ago. It came in second at another car show in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and just a very special car. People always ask what my favorite car is. This is my favorite street car. The red Bizzarini in the other room is my favorite race car. So it's difficult to say what is your favorite. Like saying which is your favorite child. Well, I love all of them, but you love them for different reasons and different times. And this is my favorite street car. This is a 1971 Bmw Csl Batmobile. The reason it's called the Batmobile is it has the giant wing on the back of the car, and it has all sorts of flares and other items. It was so ugly when they built it in the 1970s, they said that looks like a car that Batman might drive. These cars were incredibly dependable. I purchased this car so that we could run endurance races, a race that would run 24 hours or 12 hours at a time. An endurance race, you typically are in the car for at least an hour to an hour and a half until it's time to change tires or change gas. You pull into the pits, they add gas, they change the tires, and you go back out for another hour and a half. And you would do that for a 12-hour period or for a 24-hour period. And the cars that have to drive, race cars that have to drive that many hours successfully need to be dependable. And BMW makes an unbelievably dependable car. And this car has been successful at the Daytona 24-hour race and the Sebring 12-hour race, both in Florida. This is a 1966 Datsun 1600 race car. We call it the Barney car because it's purple, and my son, my oldest son, learned to drive and race in this car. It is a 1600cc, meaning that's the size of the motor for this particular car. It is metallic purple, which is not the proper color, but we just loved it. This particular car does not have any history, doesn't have any provenance. It's just a fun, inexpensive way to go out and learn how to start racing. This is a 1969 Alfa Romeo Gtv. It's an Italian car that was built to run the Mexican road race, which runs across the entire country of Mexico, almost 2,000 miles from the very south in Guatemala to the very north in the United States. This particular car, my 6-year-old grandson and I are taking apart because we're going to restore it and rebuild it to be a little more of a street car rather than a race car, but we'll still have enough racing aspects that we can take it to a racetrack and drive it if we like, but for the most part we'll just use it to drive around town. Part of what we do when we race is safety is the most important thing that you can possibly do when you drive a race car. You have to have the proper seat belts and always wear those belts. You have to have a Hans device, which keeps you from breaking your neck in the event that you're in a car wreck. You have to have a helmet and a fireproof suit. My particular helmet is painted like Captain America's shield because Captain America is my favorite superhero. And when I'm out of the country racing in Mexico or in Austria or other places in Europe, I want everyone to know that I'm from the United States of America. The fun thing about the suits is when you get to participate in these races, many times they will give you stickers and patches from the race that you participate in. This particular suit has my Chihuahua Express patch on, which is a race that's run out of Chihuahua, Mexico. It lasts for 4 days and you have to drive almost 1,200 miles, which is pretty significant. We stop at night to sleep, but during the day, we race from 8 o'clock in the morning till 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Some of the patches that are on this suit are the Sonoma Historic Festival, which is a race held in Sonoma County, California, at a very famous track called Sears Point Raceway. The second patch is also from that same track, but the third patch is especially special to me because in 2016 I won the race at Lime Rock Park in Connecticut, and that was the first major race I'd ever won. I'd come in second and third several times, but I'd never actually won the race. In that particular race, I qualified in third position, and with 2 laps to go, I passed the second place car, and with 1 lap to go, I was coming up on the first place car. He looked in his mirror, took his eyes off the road for just a minute, and spun, and I passed him. The car that I had passed previously that was in second place was now coming right upon me, and we crossed the finish line within 1 second of each other. I barely got in front of him, and I got the win for the patch, the trophy, the ball cap, and it was the first major race I ever won, and it was a whole lot of fun. This is a 1970 Chevron B16. Most people, when I say Chevron, think of Chevrolet, and that this is not a Chevrolet car. Chevrolet is built in the United States. This particular car was built in England in the 1969-1970 season. This car will do 174 miles an hour. It is the fastest car that we have in the garage, one of the most special cars that we have in the garage. They only made 23 of these cars ever. This was driven by a very famous race car driver back in the day. What I like about the car is that it's blue, and blue is my favorite color, and it had my football number on it, number 86.
Oh, Chip Fudge. Nicolana slipped back the third.
What we have here are 2 Cooper Formula Junior race cars. Formula Juniors are cars that you had to drive if you wanted to move up into the pinnacle of racing back in the day, which is Formula One racing. Formula One is the most expensive, the most dynamic, the fastest going race cars in the world today run Formula One. But back in 1961, to get started, you had to drive a Formula Junior first. The car we have on the right is a 1959 Cooper T56. Or last November, I was lucky enough to win the Formula Junior National Championship in this particular car. And the only reason I did is I qualified third in the race, and the two people that were faster than me failed to show up to the starting line for the start of the race on time. And so they had to start at the very last of the 42 cars that were on the track, and I got to start off at the very first. By the end of the race, the man that should have been in first place had moved up from 42nd to 12th, and the man that was behind me, he and I battled the entire race. He attempted to pass me on the last lap. He didn't do it. I was able to get away from him and come across the finish line. At this point, I have a gold helmet coming with my name on it, indicating that I was national champion in this particular car, in that particular race for 2019. So this is a 1971 Kawasaki 500. This is not the motorcycle I drove to high school, but it is exactly like the motorcycle I drove to high school. When I was 13 and a half years old, my brother and I got two Honda motorcycles to throw our paper routes on, and I've been an avid lover of motorcycles and then cars all of my life. I've only had this particular motorcycle for about 3 weeks now, but whenever I start it up, it reminds me exactly of the feeling that I had when I was driving to high school. We don't have much of a motorcycle collection anymore, maybe 7 or 8 motorcycles, have a lot more cars, but motorcycles were always my first love, and just love having the freedom, feeling the wind blow, and running around Oklahoma in the summers on these motorcycles always is a great, great feeling for me. This is a 2006 Ford GT. The Ford GTs were made famous back in 1965 and 1966 when they ran the race in France called Le Mans. There is also a movie recently produced called Ford versus Ferrari, and it was about all of the work that it took Ford to build a car that they could take to Europe to beat Ferrari. Ferrari had always been the finest racing machine built for Le Mans and many other races in Europe. And the Americans decided to build a car that would go over and beat Ferrari at their own game. This particular car is a copy of the 1966 cars. It's an updated version made in 2005 and 2006. This very car was owned by a man named Chip Fudge, who has a show called Overhauling on television, and it's the only one like it. It has Fudge wheels, it has special exhaust and special stripes and special shock absorbers, and they only made about 3,000 of these cars, but the fact that it's a tribute car to the cars that won and beat Ferrari back in the 1960s makes it a very special car to own and drive, and there's so very few of them in Oklahoma City and Oklahoma.